In a dim chamber of the Valley of the Kings, in November of 1922, Howard Carter knelt beside a plain wooden box. It had no decoration. It had no new name. It sat against the wall of the treasury, behind the gilded shrine of the boy king, almost ignored. Inside that box were two small coffins, laid side by side, facing opposite directions, sealed in black resin and bound with thin bands of gold. He opened them. Inside the first coffin was a body the length of a forearm. Inside the second, a body slightly longer, with delicate fingers folded across its chest. Two daughters of Tutankhamun, who had never lived to draw a single breath. Most people remember the tomb of Tutankhamun for the gold mask, for the curses, for the lions of marble and the chariots of cedar and the fortunes that the press of the world counted in the newspapers. But the most valuable objects in that tomb were not made of gold. They were not even buried with care. They were two stillborn girls in a box without a label, whose DNA, almost a century later, would expose what 18th dynasty Egypt had quietly buried for 3,000 years. Because when scientists finally extracted genetic material from those two tiny bodies, the data did something nobody had asked it to do. It revealed a family with two unnamed mothers. It revealed a paternal line that does not match the modern face of Egypt. It revealed a population, the population that ruled the Nile at its peak, that was not what the schoolbooks have been telling you. And in this video, we are going to walk through exactly what those daughters were carrying in their cells, what the lab confirmed, what the lab tried to confirm and could not, and why the silence in that data is the loudest part of the story. Let us go back to 1922. Carter labeled the wooden box as Article 317. Inside it were two human-shaped coffins. The smaller body, 317A, measured about 25 centimeters from crown to heel. The larger one, 317B, measured about 36. A decade later, an anatomist from Cairo University, Douglas Derry, performed the first autopsy. He concluded both fetuses were female. He estimated the smaller one at about 5 months of gestation. He estimated the larger one at about 7. The smaller body had no eyebrows, no eyelashes, and a piece of preserved umbilical cord still attached to its abdomen. The larger body had been actively embalmed. A small incision on her left groin. Linen packed through her nose into her skull. Whoever buried these two girls did not consider them disposable. They were prepared for the afterlife with the same care that the body of their father, the most famous boy king in human history, received in the same room. But for almost 90 years, nobody could prove they were his. They were assumed to be. It made sense. The box was in his treasury. The coffin shared design elements with his own. But assumption is not evidence. And in the ancient world, mummies traveled, were reused, were renamed. It took until the year 2010, when a team led by the Egyptian Mummy Project published their results in the Journal of the American Medical Association, for the answer to be confirmed by something other than guesswork. The probability that Tutankhamun was the father of the smaller fetus came out to 99.979%. The probability that he was the father of the larger one came out to 99.999%. The two daughters in the wooden box were his. That is settled. But here is where the data starts to do something strange. The same study reached up the family tree. It identified the body in tomb 55, the disfigured male skull and torso whose name had been chiseled off the walls of his own coffin, as Akhenaten, Tutankhamun's father. It identified an unnamed female mummy in tomb 35, the so-called younger lady, as Tutankhamun's mother. And then it identified Akhenaten and the younger lady as full brother and sister. Tutankhamun was the child of a sibling pair. That is not a rumor. That is what the family DNA says. Now, this is a moment that needs a small pause for context, because consanguinity is one of those words that the family of every royal house has wrestled with, and most people do not know how steeply the damage compounds. Imagine a glass of water. Pour in a single drop of ink, and the water still looks clear. Pour in 2 drops, and you can begin to see a tint. Pour in 3 or 4, and the water is no longer transparent. Genetic risk works the same way. A single first cousin marriage is small. A grandparent who was also a cousin doubles the load. A father and a mother who are full siblings concentrate the ink so thickly that any recessive defect carried silently for generations comes out into the open. That is what scientists found. Tutankhamun himself, when his body was placed inside a hospital scanner in 2005, showed a cleft palate. He showed a club foot on his left side. He showed missing bone in his right foot. He showed a mild curvature of the spine. He was a king who walked with a cane. 130 walking canes were buried in his tomb. His older relatives had milder versions of the same defects. His daughters, by the data on Table 3 of the JAMA paper, carried mild curvature of the spine as well, even at 7 months in the womb. The ink in the water did not stop at him. It dripped down into the next generation. Now I want to ask you something, because if you have made it this far, you already feel where this is going. Why does a tomb so carefully sealed, with a treasury chamber laid out with reverence for the king's children, leave the names of those children blank on the coffins? Why does the same tomb leave the name of his mother unrecorded in the surviving record? There is a difference between being forgotten by history and being deliberately not written down. Hold that question. We come back to it. Because there is another silence in the data that nobody talks about. When the lab tried to identify the mother of the two daughters, they tested a candidate, a mummy known as KV21A. A woman buried in a separate tomb, alone, anonymous. The DNA she shares with both parents suggested she could be the mother, but the data was not statistically strong enough to confirm it. So the report uses careful language. It says her data suggest she is the mother of the fetuses. It says the data are not significant enough to identify her as Ancestry, Tut's known queen and half-sister. Let that sit for a second. The mother of the two girls in that wooden box does not have a confirmed identity. The mother of Tutankhamun himself does not have a confirmed name. 2 generations of mothers around one boy king, both unnamed. Now we cross into the deeper layer of the genome, where the data does something that I have not yet heard a single mainstream documentary speak about clearly. The royal paternal line of Tutankhamun's family, the Y-chromosome that came from his grandfather Amenhotep III, then from Akhenaten, then to Tutankhamun, is haplogroup R1b. But here is the part that almost did not reach you. The team that published the family study in the Journal of the American Medical Association left the Y-chromosome data out of the official paper. No haplogroup, no table, no figure. The world only learned what was on that chromosome because a Discovery Channel film crew, filming inside the Cairo lab, accidentally caught the laboratory computer screen for a few seconds of footage. A Swiss genetics company froze the frames. They read the markers on the Y chromosome directly off the screen. They matched the profile. It was R1b. 11 years later, in 2021, the lab itself quietly confirmed it in a follow-up review paper buried inside a journal that very few people outside the field will ever open. Now, before we get into what R1b actually means, you need to understand what this piece of DNA is. The Y chromosome is the one piece of your DNA that travels untouched from father to son, generation after generation, for thousands of years. It does not mix. It does not get diluted by the mother's side. It is closer to a family surname carved in stone than to a normal gene. And whatever surname this dynasty carried on that chromosome was not Egyptian. Haplogroup R1b is today the most common father line of Western Europe. It is most frequent in Wales, in Ireland, in Spain, in France. It is carried, today, by only about 1 in 100 Egyptian men. 1 in 100. The men who ruled the Nile during its richest century carried on the line of their fathers the same chromosome that the average modern Irishman carries. That is not the face that has been put on the textbooks. That is not the face on the postcards. That is not the face on the souvenir bust at the museum gift shop. So what happened? What we have seen up to this point is one family, one closed circle of brothers and sisters and parents, inside one tomb. But to understand how strange that family really is, you have to step back and compare them to the people who lived along the same river at the same time. And that comparison was finally done in 2017. A separate team, working out of Tübingen and the Max Planck Institute, published in Nature Communications a different kind of study. They sequenced 90 mummies from the site of Abu Sir el-Melek, dating across 1,300 years of Egyptian history, from the New Kingdom down into the Roman period. And they ran one simple test. They asked the genome of those ancient mummies, who are your closest living relatives today? The answer was not Egyptian. The closest living relatives of dynastic Egypt are the people of the Near East, the Levant, parts of Anatolia. The genome of pharaonic Egypt is closer to a modern Lebanese farmer or a modern southern Turkish villager than to a man born in Cairo today. And then, when the same team ran the same calculation, comparing those ancient mummies to modern Egyptians, they found that modern Egyptians carry roughly 8% more sub-Saharan African ancestry than the dynastic population did. They dated that influx. It arrived after the Roman period. It moved into the Egyptian gene pool in the last 700 to 1,250 years. That is the trans-Saharan slave trade. That is the medieval Nile commerce. That is post-pharaonic. The Egypt that built the pyramids and embalmed those two daughters was not the same population, genetically, as the Egypt that lives along the same river today. This is the suppressed lineage in the title of this video. Not suppressed by a single pharaoh. Suppressed by 3,000 years of demographic change that the popular image of ancient Egypt has never been updated to reflect. Now, all of this brings us back to that wooden box in the treasury. Two daughters of Tutankhamun, a mother who cannot be confirmed, a grandmother who cannot be named, a great-grandfather whose Y-chromosome would not fit today in his own country. The 18th dynasty was not a continuation of an unbroken Egyptian line stretching back to the first pharaohs. It was a closed, intensely inbred genetic island, sitting on top of a much larger Egyptian population, with paternal roots tracing somewhere outside the African continent entirely, and with a habit of consanguinity so tight that, by the time it produced its most famous son, it could no longer reliably produce a living grandchild. The two girls in that box were the end of the line. Tutankhamun fathered no other heir. He died at 19. Within a generation, the throne would pass to a man named A, then to a soldier named Horemheb who had no blood connection to the family at all. Now we need to be honest about something, because no responsible look at this evidence skips the disclaimer. Ancient DNA from Egyptian mummies is one of the most contested fields in modern genetics. The climate is hot. The embalming salts, especially the natron the priests packed the body with, eat DNA apart. Some researchers have argued that pulling clean DNA out of these particular mummies should barely be possible at all, and that the family tree claims need to be repeated by a second independent laboratory before anyone treats them as settled. Two genetic specialists, Eske Willerslev and Eline Lorentzen, wrote a letter directly to the journal that published the Tutankhamun family study, raising exactly these concerns. They have not been answered by replication, 15 years later. So if you want to hold the family tree claims at arm's length, that is a defensible scientific position. But notice that the silences hold up either way. The mother of Tutankhamun is unnamed in the written record regardless of what the DNA says. The mother of his daughters is unnamed regardless of what the DNA says. The R1b father line recovered from these men is consistent with separate published evidence on the same dynasty. The post-Roman demographic shift in Egypt is a separate study, on a separate site, by a separate laboratory. That one is not contested. So we come back, where we started, to a small wooden box in the corner of the treasury. Two coffins laid side by side, facing opposite directions. Two girls who never breathed. The end of a sibling marriage that produced the most famous face in human history and could not produce a second generation. Howard Carter did not record the names of the children when he opened the box. There were no names to record. And almost 100 years later, when we asked the cells of those girls who their mother was, who their grandmother was, where their great-grandfather's chromosome came from, the answer the data gave back was the same answer the inscriptions had given back in 1922. Silence. The kind of silence that is not absence. The kind of silence that is somebody somewhere deciding what gets remembered. If you found yourself nodding through this, if you are the kind of person who has always sensed that the version of ancient Egypt sold to you on a postcard is missing something, you already know what you are. You are someone who reads the silence between the inscriptions. There is another body, in another tomb, in a completely different corner of the ancient world, whose DNA told a story even stranger than this one. A body that was not embalmed. A body that was frozen. A man whose own father line did not fit the country he died in either. The video for that one is waiting on the end screen. Open it. The silence speaks there too.